before the presence of the Lord. Lord, we look to you now for guidance and instruction. We ask that you bless this session in every way. Bless the participants and bless the instructor. Take full control. Lord, may everything go according to your will and purpose. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So, good day everyone. We are Group 7 and we will be tackling modern fantasy which is prepared by Santos Crisel, Santos Sherwin, Suarez Chico, Tagsim Angela, Yaya Cristan, and Vicentino Joanna. But first, let's have an energizer to hype you up before we proceed to our discussion. And that will be led by Mr. Santos Sherwin.
All right.
Okay.
But before we begin, let's just present first the screen.
Okay. Allow me to present the screen.
All right. Now let's get ourselves prepared and ready for the game that we are going to present you guys. And this energizer will allow us to have an insight, a heads up for us to be able to learn more about the topic that we will be discussing for today. And now the screen is now sharing. One moment.
Can you see it now?
All right. This screen is now presenting. And yes, we will be playing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, a special edition for the Modern Fantasy Group. All right. So we will be needing our participants, namely Angelica Estabaya. You can now unmute yourself and show us your, um, show off and turn on your camera.
Hello. I'm not able to turn on my camera kasi I'm having intermittent connection. Is
All
that
right,
okay?
that's fine. And your voice will be so helpful for us to execute what is our heads up for today. And now, let's just go on for the first question. All right, before we begin, let me just first give you a heads up that you will be having three assistance if you were unable to answer the question. And also, we will provide the question and choices for you able to choose from those to have the correct answer, and you will earn points as it is presented on the left side of the screen. And also for this question number one, this might cost you $500. And the first question is, who is the author of the movie Harry Potter? A. J.K. Rowling. B. David Yates. C. Alfonso Cuaron. D. Mike Newell.
I believe the answer is letter A, J.K. Rowling.
Oh, the answer is letter A, J.K. Rowling. Is your answer correct or wrong? Next slide. Okay. The answer is yes, it's letter A. The seven book Harry Potter series was authored by British author Um, J. Rowling K.A. Young, wizard named Harry Potter, and his companions Hermione, Rainier, and Ron Weasley, who are all students of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and the Wizardry, are featured in the novels. The major plot is around Harry's battle with Lord Voldemort and a dark wizard who wants to become immortal, overturn the Ministry of Magic, and rule over all wizards and muggles, non-magical people. And also, let's proceed with the second question. Let's move on with Miliarada. You can unmute yourself.
Hello.
All right, let's move on with the second question. Okay. All right, this question is amounting to $1,000. And the following, and the question is, the following are examples of modern fantasy except letter A, The Chocolate Touch, letter B, Narnia, letter C, The Lord of the Rings, letter D, Hercules and Lion. Miliarada, choose from the choices.
I think letter C.
Letter C, The Lord of the Rings, right? Oh, unfortunately, the following examples are modern fantasy, except for Hercules and Lion. Next slide, please. Modern fantasy example stories are The Chocolate Touch, Narnia, and The Lord of the Rings. Let's proceed with the third question. The third All right, as we step up, the third question is amounting to $2,000. And the third question is, what is the characterization of modern fantasy? What is the characterization of modern fantasy? For us to have it answered, let's have Banyas Daniela. Banyas Daniela, you can unmute yourself. And the question is, once again, what is the characterization of modern fantasy? This question is amounting to $2,000. A. People act like animals. B. It is a type of persomorphism. Letter C. Characters can have special powers. Or letter D. Animals personify human beings. What is your answer?
Mm, what is the characterization of modern friends? I think it's letter it's letter C.
All right, it's letter C. Characters can have special powers. Let's proceed with the answer. Is he correct or wrong? That's right. It's letter C. Characters can have special powers. One of the characterization of modern fantasy is having a character with superpowers. Okay, let's proceed. All right. The fourth question is amounting to $3,000. And also, who wants to volunteer for this question? Patrolia Daniela, you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Good afternoon. And our question is, okay, the question is amounting to, give me a second. And first, Patrolia Daniela, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
All right,
I
that's perfect. And are you ready to have the question right now?
50-50. I'm kind of nervous.
Oh, that really goes crazy right now. Okay, and the question is, one moment. The
Wait,
question amounting to
let me
three
fix it.
thousand dollars. Okay, the question is, he indulged.
Okay, wait lang.
Okay, that's totally fine. We are actually encountering some difficulties when it comes to our presentation. However, um, it's going on through now. Okay, what do you think the question, Daniela?
Something about the monkey and the lion, I
All
think.
right. Okay, let's see if that question is really what we are going to answer right now. Okay, and also this question is amounting to $3,000. Okay, all right, and the question is going to be: he indulged in part-time fairy tale writing. He wrote a class story, The Monkey and the Turtle. Once again, he indulged in part-time writing story. He write about the monkey and the turtle. The question is amounting to $3,000, and the choices is letter A. Okay, the amount is going up and up as we reach the starting part. All right, and now we have the question for $3,000. The question once again is: he indulged right. He indulged in part-time fairy tale writing. He wrote a glass story, The Monkey and the Turtle. The, the choices are A. George MacDonald, B. Jose Rizal, C. Charles Kingsley, D. Charles Ludwig Dodson. What is your answer?
I think it is our national hero, B, Jose Rizal.
All right, that's perfect. Let us see if the answer is correct. Board, the answer is it's letter it's letter B, Jose Rizal, the turtle and the monkey, also known as Pagong at Maching. Ito nga, and it is a folktale from the Philippines. Its Tagalog name are ang Pagong at ang Maching or si Pagong at si Maching. In this story, a tortoise and a monkey battle it out in a banana tree. Jose Rizal popularized the tale by having it published in English in the July in the month of July 1889 issue of Scribner's Oriental Record in England. The publication is regarded as the official start of the Philippine children's literature. All right, and let's proceed with the fifth question. And this fifth question is amounting to $5,000. The question is, okay, let me just ask first. Who wants to volunteer to win $5,000? Okay, I'm seeing hands up. Angelica Samiana, you can unmute yourself. Hi, Angelica. How are you doing today?
Good afternoon. I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
fine.
All right, to win $5,000, the question is: this is another absolutely vital element within fantasy fiction. When you are writing in this genre, your story takes place in a completely new world. The, the choices are A. Magic system, B. A central conflict, C. Well developed setting, and letter D. Uniqueness of modern fantasy. For $5,000, what do you think the answer?
I'm not really sure, but I think it is C.
All right, it's
Letter
letter
C.
C. Well-developed settings. Let's proceed. What is the correct answer? Well-developed settings. Let's proceed. What is the correct answer? All right. In writing modern fantasy, it's correct. Letter C. Well-developed setting. Actually, in writing a modern fantasy story's well-developed setting is a mess. It will take the story to a completely new world other than Earth that will make you feel fantasize. Let's proceed. All right. And that ends our question and answer portion. Let's proceed with our discussion problem. Let me just share my screen so that we will be able to have discussed more about modern fantasy. And also, once again, we are the group 7 and let me know just okay, one moment. Let me know just give the floor to our members, which this is for. Okay, before we begin, the learning objectives is at the end of this discussion, the students should be able to first define modern fantasy. Second is to identify the types and characterization within the topic. And lastly, we will be able to evaluate the selection of modern fantasy. And I am going now to give the floor to our next presenter. This is for Crisel Santos and Chico Suarez. You can now unmute yourselves and present the definition and description of modern fantasy.
Okay. Good day, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes,
Am I loud and
perfectly.
clear? Thank you. Now let's know what is modern fantasy. Next slide, please. Okay. So, modern fantasy is a kind of story that is created using a vast imagination of an author. So, this genre is also called contemporary fantasy, in which it means that it is set on the present day of the writer. It's a kind of literature that violates the natural and physical world that we know. Magical events are normal in this kind of genre, and this story includes talking animals, magical creatures, and other beings that don't exist in the real world. And that is the modern fantasy. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So now let me give you a brief history about this topic. So, modern fantasy emerged during the late 19th and beginning of 20th century. So, uh, in this century, they don't call it as fantasy, but they call it as fairy tale before, because the word fantasy is not yet created in this century. So, the author George MacDonald and his creation, The Princess and the Goblin and Pantheistes are considered the first fantasy novels that was created for adults. So another writer in this era helped enhance the fantasy genre. His name is William Morris, in which he wrote fantasy novels inspired by medieval romances and sagas. So Morris is a very important writer in this genre because he is the first creator who wrote a story that the setting of it took place in a purely invented world. So again, take note that the word fantasy was not yet invented during this era. So moving on in the late 20th century, the term fantasy was developed due to the well-known author J.R.R. Tolkien. So J.R.R. Tolkien wrote the books The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which these two books greatly affect the status of the fantasy genre in this era. So the emergence of Tolkien's novels greatly influenced plenty of writers of this genre. Fantasy also became well known due to the success of the Tolkien's novels. So with this, Tolkien became the father of modern fantasy. So up until now, the genre continuously improved and enhanced by different authors. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, let's know the difference between traditional fantasy or traditional literature and modern fantasy. So, in traditional fantasy or literature, it is a kind of story that usually came from the ancestors passed down orally through each generation. The settings, the stories have less details in it and is magical. So, the settings also took place only in our world and authors just add magical touch in it. So characters of traditional literature usually symbolizes something, and they don't have any development. So in modern fantasy, however, uh, I okay. Let me just give you an example of traditional fantasy first. So some of the examples of this kind of story are legends meets epics, fables, fairy tales, and others. So now let's move on to modern fantasy. So modern fantasy, however, has a huge difference in the setting of it. So authors in this genre give more details and descriptions about the place where the story is taking place. So also the setting is usually from another dimension other than Earth or other than in our world. So the characters of modern fantasy are now undergoing independent development and all throughout the story. So example of modern fantasies are Lord of the Rings, Narnia, The Hobbits, and other contemporary fantasy works. And those are the difference between traditional and modern fantasy. Now for the next topic, Miss Kyle Santos.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Suarez. So now let's move on to the characteristics of fairy tales. Now, first we have the story commonly begins with once upon a time. So once upon a time, it is a stock phrase used to introduce a narrative of past events, typically in fairy tales and folk tales. Then second, we have there is no definite Okay, there is no definite place where the story takes place. It may begin once upon a time, there was a prince who lived in a small kingdom. Now, third, we have the setting of the story is an illogical world inhabited with people whose lives are crossed by creatures of magic, such as fairies, witches, genies, elves, dwarfs, who meddle in the affairs of human beings by means of enchantment. So, example here is the Snow White. So Snow White, meron siyang seven dwarfs. So these human beings can be transformed into beasts. Now, fourth, we have it is unreal world in which the most difficult problem can be solved by enchantment or magic, as the waving of a wand, granting three wishes. Example is Aladdin, wearing a magic ring, repeating a charm or spell. So the ending is always happy uh, no matter how great the problem is. So, why is magic used in fairy tales? So, hard magic operates on clear and specific rules and solve problems for the protagonist. So, on the other hand, soft magic has no clear rules and is generally used by antagonists to create problems for the protagonist. So, yung magic in fairy tales operates as mainly soft magic. Now, fifth, every character acts according to his nature, and the stories have move in strong, direct action with an expected ending. So the good are rewarded and the evil are punished. So next slide, please. Let's now have the characterization. First, we have the characters can have special powers. So, characters and objects can have special powers, magical objects, magical fairies, magical spells, fairy godmothers, and wicked witches. Second, animals act like people, so it is called anthropomorphism. So the stories that use anthropomorphism are quite common in children's literature. And having animals dress and behave like humans makes it very easy for the child to identify with the fairy tale's protagonist. So example here is Cinderella. So Cinderella can, you know, communicate with animals. Next up, we have the setting. So, place is imaginary or of another world or universe. Um, Fairy tales and fantasy stories transport the reader into other worlds that are fresh with wonder, surprise, and danger. So, they challenge the reader to make sense out of those other worlds. Also, to navigate their way through them and to imagine himself in a place of the heroes and heroines who populate those worlds. So time is anytime or no time. Also, we have the fantasy time. So like what I have said a while ago, we have here the once upon a time sets the stage. So that's our starting point. And we have the they lived happily ever after closes the tale. Anytime or any place, timeless or placeless, or long, long ago. And lastly, we have the time travel is possible. So there are folk tales in which a person goes to a magical place for a short period of time. Okay, next slide, please. Now we have the plot. So the plot is the basic structure of a fairy tale. Involves a hero performing one or more tasks and then being rewarded as a result. So the obstacle usually appears to be insurmountable, but with a bit of creativity and some magical assistance, a solution can be found. First, we have it is varied, but usually surprising twists or developments. Developments, for example, from good to bad or from bad to good. Um, Next, we have involving situations not possible in our realistic world. So, like what I have said a while ago, some heroes they go to another place or a magical place for a short period of time. Next, we have the plot starts right out with fast moving action that grabs the listener's interest and keep it. Next up, we have conflicts are usually resolved with great deeds or acts of human kindness related to good and bad or evil. So, fairy tales have happy endings because they were designed to help children to learn from right and wrong. So, the evildoers and children who misbehave in fairy tales often meet grisly end, but the children who listens to their parents and who do good, right come out on top. Okay, uh, next slide po. So let's now have the theme. So good versus bad or evil. So in reading stories about good versus evil and stories where bad comes to those who are otherwise good, we build a sense of reality for children. So we create a real world environment and show children that we do not live in a perfect world. So in classic fairy tales, consequences do not only fall upon those who are evil, but consequences and evil also fall upon those who are good. Next up, we have uses magic or other ideas to achieve the extremely possible. So I have already mentioned that a while ago that in modern fantasy, usually they uses powers and magical elements. Now we have year 14. The first, we have problems of young adults. So children's literature helps a young child make sense of what it is to be human and helps them understand the world around them. So the fairy tale genre provides ways for children to receive important messages. Second is we have the security. So fairy tales are not just for children. They can teach us valuable lessons about the importance of security na din. Third is fear of leaving home. So we have an example here, Hansel and Gretel. Fifth is fear of not having children. No. Fourth is fear of not having children. Fifth, fear of not being loved or giving love. Sixth is reflect basic values and concerns of different cultures. Seven is good and evil. I have mentioned that a while ago na din. Eight is right and wrong. Nine is justice and injustice. 10th, we have happiness, kindness, friendship, and loyalty. Usually, we experience that theme in some modern fantasy or fairy tales. 11th is good, triumphant over evil. 12th is love and loyalty. 13th is love and loyalty can transform. And lastly, we have discuss basic values of people. Next slide po. Let's now have the style. So, use of magic or possibly powers that have no scientific basis yet the scientific basis yet verified by repeatable evidence. So, like what I have discussed a while ago, hard magic operates on clear and specific rules and solves problems for the protagonist. Use of mental powers or technologies that are not possible or not yet discovered. So, it's like same lang din dito sa umpisa. Next, we have the tone. So feel that in a magical world, the story is plausible. So magical realism, yung tawag doon. So magical realism, it is a part of realism genre of fiction. Like fairy tales, magical realism novels, and short stories, they blur the line between fantasy and reality. So next we have despite the availability of magic, the struggle of the characters seem authentic and failure an option. And lastly now we have the point of view. Could be any, pero madalas third person narrative. So the point of view in traditional fairy tales is the third person narrator. Fractured fairy tales often change the point of view to the person, bringing the reader into the world of one character. So that will be all for my part. Let's now call on the next presenter.
All right, thank you for that one. And the next presenter is going to be me and Kristen Yaya. And also, we will talk or discuss about the evaluation and selection of modern fantasy. Let's proceed with the first stop. And also, evaluation and selection of modern fantasy. Well, fantasy readers expect certain things from the book they consume. And no, we're not talking about the common type like elves, dwarves, trolls, and dragons, where we are referring to much broader elements, general concept within which you can be as inventive and imaginative as you like. And also, we go on with the magic system. What is a magic system? It refers to things that occurs or exist in your story. So technically, it is something or element of sorcery, witchcraft, and enchantment are the examples of this magic system. And also, basically anything with no basis in real world evidence or logic can be considered as magic. Okay? And there is where you can really set your story apart from others in the genre of your magic system. That is what we call magic system. Okay, let's proceed with the second, which is a well-developed settings. A well-developed setting is this is another absolutely vital element within fantasy fiction, where you are writing in this genre, your story takes place in a completely new world. And also, here are the things to consider for a well-developed settings. Um, it answered this question: what does it look, sound, and smell like? Consider things like landscape, climate, man made structures, and also people's appearances. And also, what are its people like? Are there distinct groups or classes? How does this society operate? Okay, and also, who holds the power in your world? More on this point below. Or where do your character fits in the world? This is something that we really need to focus on, because a well-developed setting is a must for us, because it helped us to distinctly uh, analyze what is the story that we are telling to, and it actually simplifies the story that we are wanted to tell to our readers. And also, let's proceed with the central conflict. In every story there must be a conflict that can actually be the point of action or the climax. And also, The key to every good story is the conflict, especially true in a fantasy fiction, and where the stakes are often higher for your characters, and the story usually stretches across multiple books in the series. Conflicts include inner conflicts experienced by your characters, small scale conflict experienced between your characters, and also large scale conflicts in which your characters are up against a powerful external force. Note, don't be tempted to write in conflict just for the sake of it. For example, in the form of an unnecessary extra battle or fight scene while you want to keep your readers engaged and excited. Introducing conflict purely for the sake of creating some action that will make the story seem forced and unnatural. Okay? Focus instead on exploring conflict organically, purely, because we really need to consider the consequences or of characters' action and follow them on their natural course. And let's proceed with the next, which is a power structure or a system of governance. In every fantasy world, there must be an established power structure for us not to be aligned with a different part of the story and also for us to be directed to our focal point. Okay? And this structure should be followed with the correct plot or settings that we can use to have a greater structure for our story or much more for our modern fantasy stories. Let's proceed with the uniqueness of modern fantasy. Modern fantasy is distinguished from other genres by story elements that violates the natural physical law of our world because it helps us enter the new imaginative and idealistic world that opens up a different lifestyle. And also, they must create a setting with a new set of physical law and believable characters and a credible plot. This story should invite the reader to examine issues of the human condition and believe that such world could really exist. This and lastly, modern fantasy differs from traditional fantasy in that the story have an identifiable author and were written as early as the 1880s. Moving forward, we have here actually uniqueness of modern fantasy. Some adults dismiss modern fantasy as being too whimsical and not grounded firmly in reality. In actuality, good fantasy tells the truth about life. It clarifies the human condition and captures the essence of our deepest emotions, dreams, hopes, and fears. Metaphors presented in modern fantasy help us to enhance our communication and thinking by increasing our frame of reference and understanding, creating interest, and going beyond the intellect to act on our emotion. Readers of modern fantasy are become actively engaged with the story and the message being presented. We are encouraged to explore hard issues from the varying viewpoints of the characters. And that is my discussion, and I'm now giving the floor to Kristen Yaya.
Hello, everyone. I'll be only adding in some things for the this part evaluating modern fantasy. It's only a couple things, so even though they may take their readers into wild and imaginative lands or introduce them to weird and wonderful characters, fantasy authors are not exempt from following the standards of good writing. As with all types of fiction, well written fantasy will contain believable and interesting characters, authentic settings, and well developed plots. But fantasy has a special evaluation criteria as well, centering on elements of fantasy and how the author uses them. The fantastic elements, be they characters or setting, must be believable and central to the core of the story. Next slide, please. Okay, so excuse me. The key to a well-written fantasy is the author's use of logic, consistency, and believability. Authors of fantasy may ask readers to suspend their disbelief and enter into a world of make-believe. Therefore, it is critical that the readers believe in the fantasy and can understand and enjoy it. Logic, consistency, and believability runs through the major elements of a fantasy story: setting, plot, and characters. Okay, so I'll be listing down some things and expounding on each and one of them. In regards to logic, consistency, and believability. Okay, so the first one is logic, consistency, and believability in setting. The author presents the reader with a created world. Even a created world must have rules, and the author must ensure that those rules are followed consistently throughout the entire story. It takes place in the real world. Enough details must um must be provided to make the story seem believable. Okay, next is logic, consistency, and believability in plot. It is often centered around a difficult and dangerous quest. Readers are often encouraged to cheer for the hero. Even when the quest seems doomed, characters' actions must always be consistent with their personalities and lead to further developments in the plot. And the last one is logic, consistency, and believability in characters. Okay, so fantasy is full of many wonderful characters. From dragons, wizards, and little people to name a few. All characters, no matter how fantastic, though, must be believable and behave in a consistent and logical fashion. The best characters in fantasy remain human like, even when cloaked in animal identities. Flung into weird lands or placed under magical spells. They are fearful when readers would be afraid. They are unpredictable up to a point, just like real people. So that's only it. That's for my part. Thank you very much.
And as we go along, I am now giving the floor to the type and examples that we believe discussed by Joanna and Angela. You can now unmute yourself.
So, okay, let's move on to types and examples of modern fantasy. Types of modern fantasy. So there are two types of modern fantasy. One is love fantasy, which stories to be considered fantasy takes place in the real world, but magical elements of fantasy make them possible. Some examples of love fantasy would be Toy Story, Charlotte's Web, and the Velvet and Rabbit. The other one is high fantasy, would be when information and experiences from the real world are taken into another world. High fantasy involves difficult journeys and supernatural characters. Some examples of these would be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and The Lord of the Rings. Technically speaking, no matter if a story is considered low or high fantasy, this does not determine if a child has a low or high level of imagination. It is just simply how these modern fantasies are categorized. However, I find it more important that children must learn the difference between the two. I say this because they need to know the different elements, not just be able to identify them, but to be able to put them to use and write their own modern fantasy. Knowing the different parts of a high and low fantasy lets students know what to include when writing their own. So next slide, please. So, modern fantasy has story elements that violate the natural physical laws of our known world. Events akin to magic, modern fantasy has known authors. Some miraculous elements found in modern fantasy are talking animals, imaginary worlds, fanciful characters, magical beings, and so on. Some types of modern fantasy include the following are um, one is literary fairy tales. It is similar form to traditional fairy tales but have an identifiable author. A fairy tale is a genre of a magical story usually originating in folklore. Typically in European fairy tales, a poor, brave, and resourceful hero or heroine goes through testing adventures to eventual good fortune. Technically, the word folktale, as used by folklorists, refers to fictional oral narratives such as fairy tales, formula tales, tall tales, and jokes. However, in common usage and sometimes even in professional writings, the word is employed generically for any traditional oral narrative like myths, legends, anecdotes, and other true story forms included. Next is the world of toys and dolls. These toys bring inanimate objects to life. Eccentric characters and preposterous situations. These are situations and characters that are over the top. They may occur in realistic setting, making them more believable. Next, extraordinary worlds, which these tales may start out in our world but quickly move into extraordinary yet believable world. Magical powers. Children in these stories possess a magical object, know a magical saying, or have magical powers themselves. Suspense and the supernatural. These are spooky, scary stories full of suspense and often touching on the occult. Time shift fantasy, based on characters who seem to move easily from their own time to a long lost point in time. Time travel is typically linked to a tangible object or place common to both eras. Imaginary realms, these stories are set in imaginary societies which resemble the Middle Ages. They may contain a quest, the struggle between good and evil, or a human character's search for identity. They are less complex and lighter in the tone than high fantasy. High fantasy, this consists of complex narratives often connected to cycles which contain recurring themes and motifs. They may be set in created world and cycles which contain recurring themes and motifs. They may be set in ay, sorry. They may be set in created worlds that characters may call on ancient or fundamental powers. Good or evil, the focus of the story may be cast or the with cosmic questions and ultimate values. Science fiction. This speculates on a world that may someday be read in light and current scientific understanding, different from science fantasy, which may use some accurate scientific information but is set in unrealistic world.
Now, let's proceed to the examples of modern fairy tales or modern fantasy and its writers. And I know some of you are already familiar with these stories. The first one, next slide, please. So the first one is a novel by Charles Kingsley. It is entitled The Water Babies. So The Water Babies is a fairy tale for a land baby. It was published in 1863 and it is a novel for children by the British professor, cleric, and an activist, Mr. Charles Kingsley. So the novel was originally written to satirize religious, and it was an alternative to what Charles Darwin's work on evolutionary biology. So the story tells about the character Tom, a young chimney sweep. So when we say a young chimney sweep, they are the one who is capable, or their size is capable to clean the chimney part of the house. So it was about Tom who transformed into a water baby. So imagine how magical and mystical that. So Tom is born again after he transformed into a water baby. So he was born again into a wonderful underwater world where he is given a second chance to develop into the man he should have been. And after journeying through the natural wonders of stream, rivers, and ocean, Tom evolves into a true strong man who is able to take an instrumental role. So from a young chimney sweep into a scientist, he was born again into a scientist, or the one who can plan railroads, steam engines, and electric telegraphs. And the water babies presents as a nature, as a blooming, buzzing confusion of unbelievable yet true diversity of the world. Next slide, please. So here, the next story is Alice's Adventure in Wonderland. So I know a lot of you are already familiar with this. It was a story of Charles Ludwig Dodson, or mas kilala natin as Lewis Carroll. So, Alice's Adventure in Wonderland is a work of children's literature by the English mathematician and author and Reverend Charles Ludwig Dodson. So, it tells a story of a girl named Alice who falls down a rabbit hole into a fantasy realm populated by talking playing cards and other objects, other talking creatures. And the Wonderland described here in the tale plays with logic in a ways that it has made the story of lasting popularity with children as well as to us, adults and teenagers. And this book was popularized by the numerous film and television's adaptation of the story produced over and over the years. Next slide, please. So, the next story is entitled At the Back of the North by George MacDonald. So, At the Back of the North Wind is a children's book written by Scottish author George MacDonald, and it was serialized in the children's magazine Good Words for the Young beginning in 1868, and it was published in 1871. So, it is a fantasy centered on a boy named Diamond and his adventures with the North Wind, and Diamond travels together with the mysterious lady North Wind through the night. So the book tells the story of a young boy named Diamond, and he is a very sweet little boy who makes joy everywhere he goes. He fights despair and gloom and brings peace to his family. And one night, as he is trying to sleep, Diamond repeatedly plugs up a hole in the loft and to his bedroom wall to stop the wind from blowing in. And however, he soon finds out that this is stopping the north wind from seeing through her window. Diamond befriends her, and north winds let him fly with her, taking him on several adventures through the north wind. Though we all know that North Wind does good deeds and helps people, she also does seemingly terrible things. And the representation of North Winds in this story is that it is a pain and death working according to God's will for something good. Because sometimes everything she does that seems bad leads to something that is good. Next slide, please. So the next story is A Rabbit Hill by Robert Lawson. So Rabbit Hill is a children's novel by Robert Lawson that won the Newbery Medal for Excellence in American Children's Literature in 1945. So the main character is Rabbit, as mentioned in a previous slide. That story of modern fantasy sometimes exage the animals, or sometimes the characterization is about animals. So the main character is Rabbit, named Little Georgie, along with a host of other animals, including mice, raccoons, foxes, and more, who have lived their lives next to a long vacant house. So they have their routines and rituals that keep them living happily together, but their food supply is dwindling and they are growing worried. And then one day they ring the news that there are a new fox coming. So there are a group of people or native people that is coming to their place, and this causes concern and fear initially for the animals of the hill. And to make the story short, it is on account of this and that, on dividing night and the animals while deciding who will get to eat from what parts of the garden, they all agree to leave a portion of that garden untouched for the group of people on account of their kindness to them. And last last story, I mean, the next story is The Wonderful Adventures of Niels. As you can see, there is a ghost in the cover of the book. So, The Wonder Adventure of Niels is a book known for changing the lives of school children of Sweden, and it is very famous book through which writer Selma Lagerlöf makes children aware of the geography and culture of their country, and it helps the children become a better humans and having compassion for other living creatures. Next slide, please. So, the last one is The Monkey and the Turtle. It was a story by our national hero, Mr. our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. So the story is an eternal fight between the weak and the powerful, uh, and the classic book, specifically this fable, is all about the cunning and greed, and escalates into a battle of wits, and ultimately a fight for survival, that the weak and poor and should die, and the wise and powerful observing should survive. So this is the last book, and to conclude our lesson or discussion, I would say that if a book is written featuring the real world in the reader can go to a proper map online or actual location to see exactly what the location looks like, how people dress, believe, and what the culture of the people tells in the story. However, in fantasy, we all know that it usually isn't real, and this allows children to unlock more of their creative and imaginative sides, which in turn will help them as they grow older because they'll be able to solve problems in an innovative way. And we all know that fantasy books and movies also help develop children's minds and characters as the new worlds they see, they hear, and experience. And through the text, they will help their visualizing skills, and they will have better writing and speaking skills. And we all know that reading a book or modern fantasy book, or sharing book interests with someone can help build a network of friends, which are great for having your back when you need it, especially when you are a child. And that would be all. Thank you so much for listening today. These are the references that we used, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and that ends our presentation for today. And also, we are very thankful for the participants of this meaningful conversation that we have, and also we value your time and effort. We highly appreciate it. Thank you very much. You may now leave the portal. Have a good one.